Templars, they all used terminology from the Bible. And the intent, again, is a deceptive play. It's like a double speak.
Mm-hmm.
To you and I, if we are Christians, it means one thing, but to those that are what they call have eyes to see, they know that this terminology or these symbols mean this versus that. And if you do a lot of research on these symbols, you find out that very much are being used in broad daylight to speak one language to one thing and another language to another. If you're familiar with the language
Sure.
of birds, then you understand what I'm saying. Now,
Sure.
we've got the white and black birds in the same picture, and I see the white and you see the black, but we're all looking at the same picture.
Sure.
You understand what I'm saying?
Sure.
So the terminology is being done so that it's not, you don't think anything about it. Only those that are initiated into the what I call white or black arts are aware of the doublespeak that goes on right before our eyes.
One thing that kind of feels to be kind of difficult to kind of determine at this point with what you have been talking about is that the true agenda here to actually destroy the planet Earth, or is it to sustain it? What I'm getting at here is the idea that the destruction of the planet itself, to me, seems like a very satanic agenda, and the other way around, to sustain it, would be favorable for God. But what do you think about an idea like that? Do you think that is in reverse, or what do you think about it?
Well, I guess because I've studied it, I see the need for mankind's desire to live forever. And the problem with that is that is a satanic agenda to avoid judgment. The intent of the secret society in alchemy, to perfect the stone, the philosopher's stone, that kind of thing, is to perfect the human being such that if we knew today that we would never die and never face the judgment of God, would we want to live forever? Of course, yes. I don't know very many people that would say, I can run down here and take a shot and I can live forever and never be sick or whatever. Most people would jump at the opportunity.
Well, let me tell you that to live forever, if you really think about that and really ponder the idea, I think that what these people are creating for themselves actually is a hell.
Exactly.
That's my viewpoint. To live forever on this planet and never die. I mean, that to me is actually there. So in a way, I see what you're saying, but I guess I would go from it from another angle and saying that they are actually creating for themselves, unbeknownst to themselves, of course, that they are going to live in a kind of hellish scenario because they're never going to pass on or die or leave the body, basically.
Right. And I think that's where the deception has come in to all of this, and that's a little bit of spark going through these particular organizations throughout history, is to find that particular divine spark that will allow that to occur. From all that led me to understanding what cloning would be about.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, when I first started doing research on cloning was many years before it was ever even brought up into the public eye.
Okay.
My first book was in 1999 called Antichrist, the Cloned Image of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And I had been doing research before that for a good number of years. So, I really surprised a lot of people, but once, we've gotten to the point we are now, where recently it was announced, here in the United States that we had a doctor who actually cloned himself from his skin cells.
Sure, yeah.
That was, released to the public. And then, of course, Dolly being cloned from the sheep over there in Switzerland.
No, that was actually in Scotland.
Scotland.
Sure.
If you think about those kinds of things, and then you do a little research back into Hitler's underground scientists, they were already doing that. Cloning is not a major issue. A lot of people think this is like a major science thing that you have to have certain kinds of things to be able to do it.
Yeah.
Cloning is not a hard technique at all. so, the fact that that was already being messed around with and trying to identify different genetic structures and things like that, that's been going on a while. The intent is to be able to make it live and function. And even more recently, though, I have had some research come across my desk that, the ability to take the mind just like a computer and download it, and then clone the body and then reintroduce that your mind or knowledge back into that body is one of those things that we think, well, that could have been a little bit of science fiction or whatever, but this day and time with the technology, especially nanotechnology and all the things that are out there, the capability of doing that. The only thing is that, again, once you clone a body, that's a whole different process, and that cloning is a tissue that's already existed with a spirit in it, which would be if it was, my skin cells and my spirit is in my body. But if I was to clone myself, then that clone would not have that spirit within it, because it is for man to die only one time. And so I fully believe that that is the technology that has been running through history, the spark of the divine, to try to find how you can make a body live and have it open. In other words, a vehicle for a person, spiritual person, or spirit being, I should say.
An entity type.
To be able to live in without having to fight a spirit. Again, like we were talking earlier, that if you've got to fight against something, you don't really own that body.
Sure.
You've got, it's like your car. If you got somebody else that owns the car, they can come get it. But if you own the car, you own the car. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Sure.
So that's where my research led me in the very beginning, back in 1999, to try to find, well, if you could clone a body, that would be the perfect vehicle for Satan to ride in. And, of course, looking back through some of the Jewish Talmud and things like that, I was able to find where there are documents of people who actually, what they said, were beasts of the field. They didn't have a Nesma. In other words, they didn't have a spirit that's actually in the history and in the literature. And once I was able to understand that, I'm like, okay, then we're talking about what do they call those things? They call them beast. What does the Book of Revelations call Antichrist, the beast?
Sure.
So I'm pretty sure that the cloned being will be a beast, because that's the only thing that Satan can actually inhabit. He can't create it, so it has to be something, a vehicle he can ride in, and it cannot be some mechanical thing, because if it's mechanical, it's not going to work right.
See what you mean.
Like everything else, like we were worried about computers going down if we had bad weather. He can't rely on computers. He's got to rely on something that will sustain itself. And if you do the research back and you understand how to keep tissue alive and how the Talmud spoke of these beasts of the field and the golem and how they were created, kind of like a Frankenstein. And I always believe the story of Frankenstein was kind of like a introduction to this understanding of what it's like to have a being without a soul.
Sure.
Created in a laboratory. Kind of like a introduction to that.
Yeah.
But anyway, the ability for this cloned image to be out there before the public, then for him to ride in that clone image, even still he's going to have to, he would have the powers, because he has power of the air, so he would be able to do, miraculous works or whatever. So when I was doing this research in my earlier book, I actually was going down the highway and had been reading a bunch of things, and all of a sudden I was like, well, I wonder who in the world, if I could clone someone I would want to clone, who could I bring back that I felt like, I'd like to meet or whatever.
Elvis.
Hit me. I thought I could bring back anybody, bring back Jesus Christ. And the reason I would was because he was the Son of God. He would have the divine spark, have the answer to everything. He would be the person I'd want. And I just stopped my car on the side of the road, and my grandmother, who is passed now, looked at me very funny, and I said, I know how Satan's going to do what he's going to do at the end of time. And she just sat there and looked at me like, what? And I said, I realize now, if I can just figure out how he's going to do it. Well, interesting enough, I had come across the Shroud of Turin.
Yeah.
And it was very, very interesting to me, and I did a lot of research on that. I've read about everything that's ever been written on the like what I say in the news media, and then under the news media.
See what you mean.
Underground kind of things.
Sure.
And was able to find out, of course, in 1968 that the Stirrup Committee, which was a committee that went in to do study on that, took some samples, and they were able to actually process some DNA and prove it was a man and that kind of thing. And so then I started looking again at the cloning issue, and can we take tissue from those samples, and how do we know that it's Jesus' blood and those kind of things. And so I did some little research back into some of the Nazi Hitler days, and we look at who was he trying to get rid of. He was trying to get rid of the Hebraic lineages. So he had accessibility to true Hebraic 12 tribes, blood tissues. And so he was probably able to identify in his laboratories what things were very true to the Hebraic race before even the Jews became known as Jews, because not all Jews are really true, mother, father, lineage from Abraham.
We're talking about the Sephardic and Ashkenazi lines now, or?
Right. In other words, when they were made captives to the Babylonians, then, the women, of course, had children by the Babylonians and that kind of thing. But when they came back into Israel and that area, they all encompassed everybody and called them Jew, whether they were really what I would call half or whole kind of the lineage. So I think that when our buddy Hitler was doing these tests and things, that he was trying to identify those particular blood lineages. And the reason being is because it is said that he owned the spear of destiny.
Sure,
and if that spear was the one that pierced Jesus' side, and he had any capability of removing anything from that spear, then I'm sure he was trying to find any piece of drop of blood he could get. And knowing that the Knights Templar secured the Shroud of Turin, it's called the Cloth of Edessa. It was actually stolen right after the temple and all burned, and some of the things were destroyed right after Christ died and rose again. Then you kind of know that the Templars brought that cloth through history, and in their Grail lore, I believe that was the Grail. That's the cup that owns the blood, the divine blood, and kind of like the Arthurian, legends of King Arthur. That blood's going to live again.
Sure.
It's their big thing. We're going to make this blood live again.
So you're saying here that potentially they took samples from the spear of destiny that pierced the side of Jesus, and they took this some blood samples from this and potentially try to clone Jesus again?
I think that's what they are trying to do, or they did do.
They did do,
actually,
okay.
My research talks about that. But I believe that it all started with the Knights Templar and their accessibility to the things that they had. And then, of course, with Hitler, he was very engrossed in theosophy and all the secret society.
Sure. Hey, listen, Dr. Joye, we have to round things up for this first segment here. We're running out of time quickly. And I do want to ask you if you have time for us to continue a little bit in our subscriber section, because I want to dive into a little bit more about the science and technology aspects that you briefly touched upon. What do you say about that?
Yes, I would love to. Thank you so much, Henrik.
What I want to do, though, here before we round things off is to leave the floor open to you in the last few minutes here, so you can mention your website, and for people who are interested in this kind of material that you have been talking about and potentially want to get a copy of the book and learn more, how they can go about doing that.
Okay, you can go to my website, which is www.drjoye, and it's spelled DRJOYE. That's joy with an E.com. And on that will be the link to be able to purchase my book at either one of the books, either Antichrist or Eden that we're both talking about today. They have links to be able to purchase those. And, of course, you can get Eden also on, like, Amazon.com, around the world, wherever you may live. And then on that particular website is also my email address. And I encourage anyone that has questions to email me. And if you do read my research and you have questions, once you start reading my research, I would like to hear from you so that I can give you additional sources or maybe clarify something if you're not familiar with it that will help you understand it better. So I'm very open to emails, and like I say,